Welcome to the Brain Tank. I'm Chappie, and I'm joined by
You're joined by a Rockhound.
it's Rockhound, not Rocket Hound.
No, it's just Rockhound. Should we
All right.
explain what those references are?
Yes, this is our code names, tag names. As this is Brain Tank, it will be a political democracy, democratic podcast discussing the ongoings of the current landscape here in the United States as a decision to remain anonymous. We have decided to alter our voices and give ourselves code names. I will be Chappie. I live in a Southern Republican state, even though I am a self described, I guess, Democrat, socialist, anarchist is the best way at this point. And I am joined by another, I don't know what your ideology would be specifically defined at this point, Rockhound, but he's in a state that I used to live in, that we both went to college in, that is one of the more stringent.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore. Oh wait, yeah, not anymore. You have
Yeah, let
moved.
me get to that. Let me get to that. Yeah. So I have a job. I am a lawyer, and I live in the Northeast corridor, the best region in the country.
I used to live in the
We,
Northeast.
yep. Obviously, as he was alluding to earlier, we both went to college and we went to just a state school in a Midwestern state. So you understand how that is. And obviously, we've just chosen to remain anonymous because, we have jobs. We are, well, I guess you could say well-respected individuals, and we have some knowledge. So we choose to remain anonymous because we want to keep our jobs.
I used to work as a state house reporter, and I have spoken to senators, mayors, plenty of other state level and federal level lawmakers. So, as someone who also is now in the process of getting their doctorate, I feel like as an average consumer that isn't in the legal profession, I have a greater understanding of what is going on in the current contemporary U.S. political landscape. Wouldn't you agree,
Yes,
Rockhound?
yes, I would agree. And by the way, maybe we should explain what our code names are actually from.
I am Chappie from the greatest jet fighter movie of all time, that one that doesn't get the credit that it rightfully deserves, and that is Iron Eagle. And you're Rockhound from
Rock out. So the greatest movie that Michael Bay has ever made, and one of the
never
best
seen
movies
it
ever.
yet.
It's just insane. Armageddon. So Steve Buscemi, that's the name of his character. And
On
so
a side
that
note,
is Armageddon.
Steve Buscemi has like this period where he was doing these serious movies, and then he just leaned into like non-serious movies.
And then he said, fuck it, Adam Sandler. I'll be in Grown Ups. Why not? He's a well-respected actor by that point, but he's just like, eh.
Yeah. So we're gonna start today talking about, I think, the political polarization of the country, the lack of corporate accountability, and the contradictions and the hypocrisy in the economic policy in the current Trump administration, aka tariffs. And
Yes, and I think there's a lot going on right now. And if we wanted to talk about everything that's going on, we would be here for hours. Because before we get started, anybody who's watching who may not know as much about politics as anything else, you need to understand that the strategy of the administration is to flood the news cycle. Information overload. If you're doing a bunch of different shit at the same time, who people are going to have trouble keeping up with everything.
exactly. So today we wanted to discuss the escalating political rhetoric and violence in this country. Obviously, he who should not be named was recently assassinated. Maybe I might not be able to say that. So, Charlie Kirk got undead recently, as they like to say on this platform, and or unalived. Is it right? He's unalived. Charlie Kirk was
Yeah, that's what they say.
unalived.
That's what the
Yes,
kids say now.
that's what the
They
kids
say
say.
unalive.
Yeah, the
They say
Charlie Kirk.
unalive.
Charlie Kirk was unalived, and in an era of increased inflammatory rhetoric, I think is the best way of saying it, where we've seen the attack on Governor Shapiro's house. We saw the two legislators in Minnesota be attacked by someone impersonating a law enforcement officer. We
Somebody showed
also
up to uh the house. They showed up to the Democratic House leader's house with a hammer to beat her husband. And obviously, recently, we have seen what has happened to, you know, I guess, what was he, the podcaster, influencer, pundit, Charlie Kirk?
who was
Yeah.
unalived by a groiper, which is just a Nick Fuentes right
Well,
alt.
we don't know what he is. We can't actually confirm anything because
Yeah,
we
has
heard
that
a
now
whole
been
bunch of different stuff. Well, no, they're not. So he allegedly had a like gay or trans partner, not really clear, and
we
he
don't want
grew
to
up
go
in
into
a
the
conservative.
conspiracies
Yeah, we
either,
don't know. Yes, we're
because
not going to
also now
canvass
we're
that
finding
ones.
out the weapon was found on Plantier property, and the
Yeah, like
bullets and the
we're
gun,
not
they're
going to speak.
saying there's a lot of inconsistencies that we don't know, and the same thing going on with the ICE shooting that happened the week
Yeah.
or a week
Yes.
ago. There are
And listen, before we say anything for sure, we may have our opinions, but one thing is very, very clear is that the FBI and current law enforcement at the federal level is incompetent. That's what we know.
and they're
So,
pushing the political rhetoric of us versus them narrative, as they want it to be seen where violence is not simply seen as a last resort, but almost that they're normalizing it, that
mhm.
they're desensitizing, right? Or
Yes,
that
yes,
they're making people accustomed, they're normalizing it. And that's something we want to discuss with the National Security Presidential Memorandum, NSPM
yes.
7, that Luke discussed or wants to discuss, as it aims to utilize the national security tools that many of us are aware of that became to the forefront of the national media after 9/11, as now they're being used against our own people in a capacity we haven't seen, as well as attack on free speech in a way that it's, if you don't speak the ideology we want, which is why we're doing this anonymous, because they're going after people that they believe that they can make capitulate.
And so, like we said, like political violence is escalating in this country. And what we need to do before we look at the actual circumstances of everything that's happened recently, we need to understand that over the last, basically during his entire era of running for president, being elected president, getting unelected, trying to overturn the election results, coming back, Trump has always had an inflammatory us versus them rhetoric, right? And the Republican Party has embraced that. And what we have seen with this Charlie Kirk situation is an assassination happens and a high level conservative influencer pundit gets killed and dies in a tragic way. They look at it and every chance they get, they say, we need to jump on the fact that the left is the one that is the most violent, right? And this is, they're seeing this and they're using this as justification to pass NPSM 7. And what this is, it's not an executive order, as some people have incorrectly referred to it as. It's just a policy directive. It's not like law, but it means when the FBI or any law enforcement agency is conducting their operations, they're going to have this in mind
Well,
when
before
trying
we get
to.
to that, let's real quickly talk about two things that I think we need to touch on, which is first off, the Brandenburg test, which is what is one of the strongest constitutional protections, which anyone who's gone to journalism school or anyone who's sat in in, I assume, basic law,
You
basic
don't even
level of
need to go to
laws
law school to
class,
know this stuff.
yeah, would learn that this is a court case that in 1969, Brandenburg versus Ohio, it established that the government can only punish inflammatory speech. What is inflammatory speech? Directed to incite or produce imminent lawless action or likely to incite or produce such action. That is, if I say, let's go lynch this person, let's go do this.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
If
proud
I,
that you explained that as a lawyer. I'm proud that you explained that pretty good. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
So this whole thing about Brandenburg, just as like a short historical context, it was a case, this guy who was a Klan member, white nationalist, right, was passing out flyers and he was trying to get people to go to a meeting, right? But they couldn't actually find that they were actually going to do anything violent. So the Supreme Court sided with the KKK because it wasn't going to incite imminent lawless action, and like it wasn't likely that it would happen, right? And so this overruled past precedents, which if you've maybe if you haven't gone to law school, you would hear the it was Schenck versus the United States, which was the communist flyers being passed around. This case was 50 years prior to Brandenburg. And in Schenck, it was the whole thing was like inciting harm, the fire in a crowded theater, right? This partially overruled Schenck and made First Amendment protections even stronger. Just like in the 60s, the Supreme Court was big on establishing constitutional rights protections for everyone.
yes. And what I think right here, and pe- people who have never studied for free speech, I would say there is Brandenburg as well as time, place, manner, TPM,
Mhm.
are, I would say, two of the biggest things. TPM, we can go into it's multiple cases, but from if I remember correctly off the top of my head, the way free speech also is dictated. You can say one thing in one place, but you could say the same thing in another
Yes,
place.
that's what
And
I alluded to earlier with fire in a crowded theater.
fire in a
You
crowded
can't
theater,
just,
yes. Time, place, manner.
you can't, if you yell, the whole thing about fire in a crowded theater is if you go into a theater and you say fire when there isn't one, uh,
That's inflammatory
that's,
speech.
yeah, you're just, yeah.
And then the thing is that, again, going back, time, place, manner, I can say something that would be considered inflammatory in a situation where it is expected, like, let's go kill those people and we're in a football game while talking to
Yes.
players. Okay. But I can't tell a group of friends or people that we see maybe our rivals, we say, let's go kill those people. And then, like, we're in a court of law. They will say we incited.
Yep.
I was the aggressor and I incited violence in my group to go attack that group of people.
Yep.
So
And so
go.
that basically explains where we're at right now. So those
Yes.
are the constitutional protections that we have.
Because it
Now,
creates
when
this dilemma where rhetoric that fuels violence is constitutionally shielded, as it makes the right to political speech almost absolute.
And this is why we have seen over the last 10 years the increasingly inflammatory rhetoric, especially from the Republican Party, specifically from the Republican Party, I will say. And when you see that and they incite it and they keep going, calling immigrants animals, lying about news stories about them eating pets in Ohio, things like this, the us versus them mentality that they've sowed, it is constitutionally protected. It's allowed. Trump is allowed to say on Twitter, take our country back, before having people attend a rally at the Capitol the day that they were certifying the election results. He did like that. That is not inciting violence.
But now
So we
tell them to
can
go. That's another conversation. We'll get to that. I want to
January
talk
6th is a
about
different episode entirely.
how
We can't get all into that. But
I want to talk about how the unaliveness of Charlie Kirk is something that you gave an analogy of America's Horst Wessel, if I said that correctly, and how we are seeing the right wing manipulate his death for ideological gain and mobilization. And you can give the people a little run up, give them the elevator pitch of who Wessel was and how the propaganda leader of the Nazi Party, Joseph Goebbels or Goebbels,
Yeah, Goebbels.
Goebbels, right?
I took a
Goebbels,
little German in college, so I understand how to pronounce it. It's Goebbels. But yeah, so Horst Wessel, he was he was a soldier. He was a member, he was a soldier of the military wing of like the Nazi Party, right? And this is like early in the Nazi regime, right? So this is like 1930, for example. Hitler was elected, but he wasn't firmly entrenched as the Führer of Germany yet. And so what happened was he got into basically, I believe he got into like, I think a bar fight or something. It wasn't like he got into a fight when whatchamacallit? He with like two guys that just happened to be members of the Communist Party of Germany. And so the far left in Germany, basically. And as he died in a result. And so what they did is the Nazi Party, they turned Horst Wessel into a martyr. And they used it as an attempt to crack down on the communists and the socialists in the country. Because early in the 1930s, that's who they went after first. The left, basically. And the reason why it's not exactly the same thing, but it is very similar. So Goebbels obviously used that to spread propaganda and lies and gain the Nazi Party even more popularity and power until eventually Hitler took full power and was the Führer. And here, Charlie Kirk has died in a as unalived, was unalived. He died. He passed away in a tragic way, right? And when he's now that he is dead, we have seen a directive of people to try and silence the administration to try and silence political opposition and use it as an excuse. So, for example, just random big time conservative influencers with connections to the administration have been screenshotting, tweeting, basically doxing people who refuse to express remorse for Mr. Charlie Kirk being unalived. The early start of the cracking down. And then last week we had NSPM 7. And what NSPM 7 is it's a policy directive, like I said earlier. It is not law, but it is designed to go after people who are anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-Christian, extremism on migration, race, and gender, and then holding hostile views towards traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. So you see all those words, right? And a lot of them are just big buzzwords. And normally, like nobody's anti-American if you live in America, right? Like let's be real here. Everybody loves America that lives here. We need to get that out of the way first. But extremism on gender and race, what does that mean? Nobody knows. There is no definition for it, but this is what they are using as pretext to crack down on political opponents as a result. Go ahead and take us away.
yeah, I know. I was just trying to find the unmute
I
button.
know.
And as you touched on there, the government's response was what we mentioned earlier, the aforementioned NSPM 7, which stands for the National Security Presidential Memorandum. And this is to counter domestic terrorism, classifying a group that doesn't exist in Antifa, which is more of just kind of an idea, just anybody
Yeah,
who's,
there is no Antifa. It's not a group that actually exists in America. And if there's like random small Antifa chapters, it's probably just a group of like six people somewhere. Antifa does not have a militant organized branch. It doesn't have the strength or whatever the fuck people want, right? And
yep.
it's like we all know what it is. It's all pretext.
So
And
basically, what this is to circumvent the constitutional restrictions imposed by Brandenburg and other free speech protections that the First Amendment and the Constitution provides by instead of focusing on what people are saying, is focusing on the regulatory, so the FCC or whatever they can do just to put pressure on people, as well as their people's finances to enforce what they want rather than directly speech suppression, which would get them
Yep.
into a bunch of lawsuits. So, as NSPM 7 has been stated, it is to expand the federal definition of domestic terrorist acts, and it is targeting organized campaigns of targeted intimidation, radicalization, threats, and violence designed to silence opposing speech and limit political activity, change or direct policy outcomes, and prevent the functioning of a democratic society. And what they want to do is empower the National Joint Terrorism Task Force, NJTTF, with a new domestic focus and assign the Department of Justice in a central role in coordinating counterterrorism. So, what does this mean? Expand the definition of political violence. The NJTTF and the JTTF focused on targeted intimidation acts designed to silence opposing speech, which means they risk of criminalizing protected political dissent under the umbrella of counterterrorism, political opponents, as a manner of not getting in trouble for violating the First Amendment, which is just blatantly what that would be. And then the next thing would be the role of the Department of Justice is that they would coordinate a national effort using these law enforcement agencies to focus on prosecuting domestic threats. And these domestic threats aren't actually threats, it's just political opponents. And
So
this would be political weaponization, correct me, of the law enforcement
yes,
through selective or politically motivated prosecution,
yes.
and
So
then using IRS or the tax.
yep. And
Uh,
so what all that means, basically, all that. Let's take an example of a real group, right? Let's apply this to real life. The stated goal, it literally says, here's the quote from the directive. The United States requires a national strategy to investigate and disrupt networks, entities, and organizations that foment political violence so that law enforcement can intervene in criminal conspiracies before they result in violent acts. Right? So that is what it says. What does that mean? Oh, let's say you take a left-leaning organization like DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. That's an organization that has a lot of members, and they're a political organization. They advocate for democratic socialist causes, right? Well, let's say the IRS says, "Hey, we're going to take away your status as like a tax exempt like organization, right? We're going to go after you." Right? This is what they're using. Or the Department of Justice saying, "Hey, you guys can't have these meetings because you're going to spread violence." This is what that means before they happen. That's the whole basis of the Patriot Act after 9/11, as we alluded to earlier. That's what this is. As Chappie's about to explain, the problem with that is it's going to create a chilling effect on free expression.
all right. Now, Rockhard did a good job explaining right there. And yeah, people are going to, it's going to create this self, basically self censoring as a result of, okay, they're going to go out after people because they're going to just create pressure, and then as a result people are going to get scared, and because they don't want scrutiny they're going to just self-censor, and what we're already seeing, capitulate and just pay these settlements. And this is going to drive more misinformation, allow for the government to continue to feel emboldened that they'll be able to get away with this, especially with the Supreme Court that's allowing them to do this. So we go over to what's happening. Look, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries need to get out. We have a look. I've said this before. The pen is not mightier than the sword unless that pen is being stabbed into the neck of your opponent. As
And
Chuck
when you think,
Schumer,
yep, 100%. And these guys personify the pen is mightier than the sword, but we're not actually going to stab it into your neck. We're just going to sit there and take it. It took the bullying of one journalist he's an independent journalist on Twitter, Ken Klippenstein. He kept tweeting about this NSPM 7. He kept tweeting about it. He kept tagging legislators, and it took him bullying people into actually getting some Democrats in Congress to start talking about it. And
exactly.
instead, and instead of them talking about that, they're meet, like, I understand they want to meet with Trump, but they meet with Trump knowing that it's going to be fruitless. And
And
these guys just personify being spineless.
I think we're seeing that Democrat leadership, it doesn't know which direction they want to go with instead of just hopping on the socialist train of AOC and Bernie, where actually Trump voters would actually vote more likely for Bernie or an AOC type of candidate than they would for a Kamala Harris or somebody of that vein. And with Chuck Schumer right now, I think we're seeing with the 2025 government shutdown, Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer are trying to stand firm on healthcare issues. And I think they're finally kind of doing something there. But at the same time, it just feels like they're just looking for room of compromise to get the job done instead of,
But the Republicans just aren't like the problem is it's like the Democrats know that like the Republicans are not going to negotiate. And
well, this
they
is what I
need
was
to
going to
under
say is that they're trying to stand firmly on principle instead of compromising to get things done and just like
Yes, but
it.
you can't in my opinion, I don't think you can compromise with the Republicans because even
No,
if
but
they
there's
agree
nothing to
to a deal,
compromise. There's nothing to
yeah,
compromise, but you need to use your leverage to compromise in the sense that to get
they have
what
to
you want.
compromise with they do have to compromise within their own party for sure. That's the
Yes,
biggest issue
but they're
here.
standing too firm on principle.
I
Like,
mean, yes, in terms of like they're too busy resisting the old ways of the Democratic
yes,
Party.
yes.
Like, right, like by this whole standing firm on principle, we don't mean that they should cooperate with the Republicans. That's not what we're saying.
No, but they're
Because
posturing.
the problem is with the Republicans is like they know that like that even if you negotiate with them and sign a deal, the executive branch is going to withhold funding anyway.
Yes.
Right? Because we're going to get to that more in detail later. But the problem with the Democrats is like they are trying to do everything they can to avoid, like for example, let's take it the New York mayoral race. The guy who won the Democratic Party is still not getting endorsed by these two guys, by the way, who we're talking about, the two Democratic leaders. They are both from New York. Hakeem Jeffries' district is in Zohran Mamdani's backyard, and they
Yeah.
have refused to endorse the Democratic leadership. The Democratic Party is still trying to stand firm on taking money from corporate donors, continuing to supply weapons to the Israeli government that is engaging in a horrible war against a horrible, not even war, we could say it's a genocide against the Palestinian people. And that is the old ways. And they are refusing to actually understand, like, that people need to understand that they need to actually adopt some progressive policies. Because if you look at what people want on both sides of the line, people want higher minimum wage, people want legal weed, right? And
Well,
unfortunately, uh, none of the parties support that at the federal level.
this is though a result of Citizens United, where corporates are having
Organizations and corporations can
have a
spend
major.
unlimited amounts. Yep. So the technical term for how they were able to do this with Citizens United is it's called independent expenditure only political committees, as what you might hear of as super PACs. They are allowed to spend money because it's, money basically to dumb it down, money is free speech. And these are the free speech of the members of these organizations that should be allowed to do that. And that's how you get where we are now with people taking money from politicians and understanding that they can either give in and get something in return from the politicians to give in, which is what we're seeing now, or pay them to get what they want. And we see both of those things.
Yeah. And what we saw was recently here in Florida, where Disney and I guess the state got into a lawsuit. And if people don't remember, it was over the Don't Say Gay law, where Disney came out and publicly opposed it as retaliation. Governor DeSantis pushed for legislative action designed to strip Disney of its decades old status of self government. What ended up happening was analysts concluded that Disney's response was poorly managed and it was slow to react and lacked transparency regarding its political donations, causing its eventual public stance to look disingenuous. The outcome showed that taking public political positions on issues unrelated to core business is highly problematic, often backfiring unpredictably and potentially catastrophically, as the company is institutionally ill equipped to navigate complex political debates. What does that mean? It means that companies basically have decided that they're not going to involve themselves in politics unless it's for their own interest.
And exactly when you look at that, for example, let's take a few recent cases. So, for example, I think there's an acquisition, I believe, with or no, Google has an SEC case that was pending from the Biden administration. YouTube recently settled a $24 million lawsuit with the president of the United States. They are looking to get that dropped, and by my guess, it will, just like any other enforcement case that Trump is being paid off. For example, you know Justin Sun. He's a crypto billionaire from I think Singapore or China maybe
Mm-hmm.
or Malaysia. He he had a big case in front of him in front of the SEC from the previous administration. He bought a shit ton of Trump coin. He's one of the largest individual holders of Trump coin.
Mm-hmm.
He's not facing any charges anymore. They settled the case. So and then obviously, as you see recently, well, I guess there's been a turn on Kimmel. Kimmel's back. But you see, Kimmel makes a joke about not even about Charlie Kirk. He jokes about the president not caring about Charlie Kirk's death, and the president goes after him. The president bullies to get his way, and make Paramount does do what he wants and fire Stephen Colbert so they can have a merger with Skydance. This is what is happening. People are capitulating because they're like, we don't need to do what we want. We'll just let you tell us what to do and just as long as we can make money. And that's where we're at right now.
And to speak on that, we'll give an example. The media. The media in this landscape is kind of adhering to the motto of neutrality, but they aren't, as that's failing us as a democracy. Their necessity as journalists is to provide us with the news and tell us what is facts and what is wrong. But they need to counter the lies and push
There's
democratic
never any,
values
yep.
into the common knowledge of the everyday people. And moving beyond that is obviously, I
When we
think,
talk about the media, hold on, we got to address the big elephant in the room with the media. If anybody's watched the news, you see they always try to have quote unquote both sides,
yeah,
right? And
neutrality.
so they never offer any pushback when
It
people get
declines
on
public
TV
trust.
and lie. Scott Bessent gets on television and says China told us one reason why they're not buying soybean imports, which we will go into detail later, is he said the Chinese are telling us one word, Biden. Joe Biden is not the president, and he has none of the reason to do with this. But he goes on TV and he says that to no pushback. This is the biggest problem with the media is they're trying to portray things as quote unquote fair, when in reality, they're just enabling because they're enabling quote unquote both sides' opinions, they are allowing people to just outright lie. And when they go on TV and they lie, people, because media literacy is dead in this country, believe that crap. The vice president said that the Democrats want to give a bunch of health care to illegals. Illegals can't get health care under federal law. Undocumented aliens are not allowed to get the benefits of the Affordable Care Act under federal law.
Literally says on the website.
The whole thing about JD Vance arguing with New York and posting books on Twitter is so dumb because the New York providing healthcare to undocumented immigrants is through their state fund, which they have complete control over. They are not taking a single dime of federal dollars to fund that program. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so when you look at this stuff and you see the fact that they can just get up here and lie. And if people remember in the election cycle, when they asked JD Vance about making up stories for the eating pets in Springfield, he said, sometimes I think it's necessary to bring attention to an issue. He said that. And because the media doesn't want to actually feel the wrath of the presidential administration and they are cowards, they're letting them do it in front of everyone.
And this is just another example of the contradiction we've seen with this administration. Another one is their American First political movement, something that we already saw in the early 1900s. We recently saw the $20 billion proposed financial lifeline to Argentina, which simultaneously is being utilized as, thankfully, by the Democrats as kind of an argument of why people should be mad at the Republican Party as we are in a government shutdown. And
And they deemed it, and a side note, I'm pretty sure they deemed it as an essential function. So even if the government stays shut down, they will still be able to provide that money.
And in response, the administration is threatening to withhold federal funding from domestic infrastructure and climate projects that are controlled by political rivals, aka blue states. So the crazy part is that even supporters in their own party are pushing against this lifeline to support solely a ideological political ally in Argentine President Javier Milei, who is described as a MAGA person rather than the traditional economic necessity or geopolitical reasonings that you would give a bailout to a country, not solely because you agree with the guy and you like him. And the worst part about this decision is that it's caused anger and confusion among loyal MAGA supporters, most notably the American farmers who feel their economic interests are being sacrificed for political foreign alignments. And what I think is obvious is that the Democrats know this government shutdown is the one leverage they have to restore the ACA, the Affordable Care Act subsidies, which is just kind of funding that was
Yep.
already there that
And
needs.
they need it. If people
Yes.
need it, millions will not be able to have healthcare. This is like as much as we want to, as much as us as democratic socialists, you could say, want to shit on the Democrats here. This is the one thing that they are actually doing that's good, right? They actually want to shut down for a valid reason. Whereas the Republican Party is, when you think about it, right, they're talking about shutting down the government and they're talking about withholding federal funding from state projects. For
And
example, let me just list off what
yeah,
the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Ross Vaught, said. He says we are going to withhold $18 billion from New York and New Jersey for the Hudson Tunnel. As someone who lives in that area, the Hudson Tunnel would be amazing as far as actually being able to drive myself in that area, right? That's an amazing state project that people need. They are withholding federal funding for that. Instead, they decided to give Argentina a $20 billion bailout, right? We're giving a $20 billion bailout to Argentina. And what is that? What does that do? Argentina has been exporting soybeans to China, picking up the market from where we left off. Back when I said earlier that Scott Bessent was lying about what China said, the reason why China is not buying soybeans is because of our tariffs on them. They said, "Okay, screw you. We're not going to buy them. We're going to buy them from somewhere else." Argentina realized because of their incompetence of their leader, hey, we need to just like we need to like lift some of the tariffs and we just need to like start selling soybeans now. So they took over a part of the market share. They took over the market share for China. Meanwhile, we are bailing them out because we want to help out Milei as to quote the Secretary of the Treasury, bridge to the election because he was handed electoral defeats because of how incompetent and unpopular his administration has been.
and a bridge
And when you
election was
yep.
a quote from Scott Bessent himself.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about this, as you said, the America First paradox, we withhold money from climate green energy projects in conveniently all blue states. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's at least 10 of them, and they are all blue states. And withholding money for the Hudson Tunnel project, but instead giving money to Argentina, who is actively taking away our market share and making us lose money on farmers. And in response, Trump is now proposing bailing out said farmers with the tariff money
We'll get to that in a sec,
hurt the
though.
farmers. We will get to
So
that more later in detail.
I just want to finish up on the domestic weaponization of funds, as currently we're in a government shutdown, which is when Congress fails to pass the 12 annual appropriation bills or a temporary continuing resolution before the start of the fiscal year. And the outcomes of this is pretty bad. Look, people are either furloughed or required to work without immediate pay. And the estimated lapse in this funding or for furlough about 3/4 of a million, 750,000 employees daily, results in a mandatory cost of roughly $400 million per day in eventual back pay. And the thing is that this stops essential government activities, medical research trials, and contracts. They're stalled or not even brought back eventually.
Yep.
And the
And
other
people will
thing,
be getting laid off again, just like they tried to do earlier this year with mass layoffs in federal agencies. They're going to try to do that again. So
yes,
it's even more, and it's just they have now they are using it as an excuse to do what they already would have done anyway, which is take complete control of the federal government and start laying all non-political
so
offices.
the threat to withhold the federal funding over policies that are deemed DEI or just in political rival states, blue states, is known as impoundment, which was from the Control Act of 1974, the Impoundment Control Act, which this basically is. Let me give you the exact legal validity and definition of this. This is the practice of the executive branch unilaterally delaying or canceling funds that Congress has already legally appropriated, known as impoundment, is generally unlawful and unconstitutional. The Impoundment Control Act, ICA, of 1974 strictly governs and narrowly limits the president's ability to defer, temporary delay, funding, any executive action taken to preclude federal funds from being obligated or spent without adhering to ICA procedures is an infringement on Congress's constitutional power of the purse. The threat of impoundment is thus a political weapon that can consistently test the legal limits of executive authority. It is relevant to note that the infrastructure and climate projects frequently targeted for funding freezes actually enjoy broad public support across the political spectrum. For instance, large majorities of registered voters, including significant percentages of moderate and liberal Republicans, support strengthening enforcement of industrial pollution limits and funding research into renewable energy sources, aka the best renewable energy is nuclear and it is the safest. So that is just a little thing that you should understand that this is impoundment and this is something that we've understood since the Nixon administration
Yep.
is illegal because Richard Nixon tried to do this and it was deemed illegal, hence
Yep.
the
You are not.
Impoundment Control Act.
Yep. The whole thing about the Constitution is that the whole thing, and obviously laws passed, is the Congress has the power of the purse. They decide the president can allocate the money with that he's assigned with how he so chooses, but he can't just say, I'm not spending this money on something. He can allocate the money by choosing who to hire, choosing what to do, right? But he can't say no. And the problem with him doing that is he already tried to lay off mass federal workers and cut funding, even without a government shutdown. And he's going to do the same thing. He's going to keep doing what he's already tried, like the Doge efforts. He's going to keep doing that. And that is going to lead to a lot of people losing their jobs. Even if they get reinstated later, they still lost money because they were temporarily laid off. And all in the name of attacking political opponents. Yet, because he says it's America first, despite all that, despite attacking his own people and hurting his own people, Trump and his administration have decided to bail out Argentina.
Yep. And so this cycle, obviously, that we just talked about, Argentina, begins with the severe trade damage that was self inflicted by U.S. tariffs, which caused China, historically the largest buyer of American soybeans, to drastically reduce its purchase. To mitigate the resulting financial hardship on domestic producers, aka farmers, the administration used revenue generated from the tariffs that might not be legal, might be reversed, to fund a domestic farm aid package. While providing some relief, this aid failed to restore the vital market access that was lost. This divisive action that was created led to a paradox, which the decision to pledge a $20 billion financial lifeline to Argentina has now made it into this whole self deprecating loop. As you mentioned earlier, the only reason they gave this $20 billion lifeline was to stabilize the political effort of a rival in Javier Milei, who they believe needed the help to provide a chance to bridge to the election, as you earlier said. And this has had huge consequences on the U.S. agricultural interests. Democrats and Republican farm state legislators have quickly voiced the opposition of this bailout, as the direct effect is that Argentina moves to lower its soybean export restrictions, which then immediately allows it to ramp up its sales to China. And this continues to undercut the American soybean farmers in the international market, causing a further drop in U.S. soy prices and granting China to have increased leverage in whatever trade talks they move forward. So it's literally just them continuing to shoot themselves in the foot like
Yep,
Plaxico Burress.
exactly. The government is literally, here's how this works, okay? These farmers, right? These farmers that are getting absolutely destroyed by their own policy, by like the government's policy. They all voted for Republicans. They all voted for the president. Then the president directly fucks them over with his tariff policy restricting who they're able to sell. One of our good friends is actually from a farming community in America, and he used to be a Republican. And obviously, after that, he saw how it affected his family, and that's why he switched. Yet, most people don't see it that way, right? And because of that, now we have to bail out the farmers with the money that we made from the tariffs that directly fucked over the farmers, all while spending even more money to bail out a direct competitor in the soybean market, which is a result of, again, failed tariff policy. And we look at all of that, and yet the administration still calls itself America First. It just doesn't make any sense.
And that's where we wrap this up with the three things we talked about today is the incitement paradox, which is the escalating rhetoric protected by Brandenburg, prompting enforcement like NSP M7, as well as capitulation by media and just people in public that are against the support of Charlie Kirk and all those ideology that might be tied, as well as businesses, organizations, all self-censoring due to potential scrutiny and the contradictions and the hypocrisy of an America first ideology, as we're seeing with the bailout for Argentina impacting directly to the U.S. farmers.
And when you look at all this stuff, you look at all these three things, we could have talked about a lot for the first episode of this show, but we felt it was particularly important to talk about these three things. Now, why is that? Well, I mean, it's the very reason why we're doing this right now without saying who we are and what our names are. Being a political, quote unquote, political opponent of the administration, right? Like having differing beliefs that differ from what the administration and what the Republicans want. Now, simply having that allows you to be targeted. Now, first, obviously, most at the beginning, they just went for the immigrants, right? And they obviously that's what it started out as. But then they started using the National Guard and military on people protesting for the rights of those said immigrants. And now this is where we are. You know, there's that old poem. How does it go, Chappie? You want to recite it for me? That old poem back in World War II era Germany.
Give me one
That's
second. I know it right
that.
here.
Yep. And
They,
that's why I want to give you the opportunity to part with the part to leave us parting with this because this sums up just the beginning of where we
so
are in this country right
Pastor
now.
Martin Newmoller, I hope I said that correctly. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
That is where we are as a country. And we can only hope that we can move forward in the best case scenario and get back to a place that America truly is a First Amendment free speech society where everyone has differing values, but everyone has the same solutions. They all want the same solutions. But
It's not
now,
about what you can do. It's not about what your control. It's not about what your country can
mhm,
do for you, but what you can do for your country.
basically, the best way I can put it is we all want to go to the same place, but we disagree on how to get there. That's how things used to be. But now I'm not even sure if we want to go to the same place anymore.
You don't want to go to Valhalla?
No, I don't.
All right. If you
And I
guys did
don't think
enjoy
Cash
this,
Patel does either.
I don't know if you'd get there. But if you guys did enjoy this, made it to the end of this episode of Brain Take and want to hear more from Chappie and Rock Hound, hit that subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're listening to this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever it may be. And go register to vote. Till next time, guys, have a good one.